My name is Rune Larsen, and I'm a PhD researcher from my main university is in Belgium. And I'm in Namibia right now doing research on youth, politics, and social change in Finland primarily. Yeah, and I've been asked here by friends to present a book or to give a few thoughts on a book that for me has been quite influential in sort of shaping my thought and also shaping my thoughts regarding my work here in Namibia. And the work that I've chosen is the book The Lily of the Field and the Bird of the Air, 3 Godly Discourses by the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, written in 1849. We're going back here. Basically what the book is about is taking departure in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, urging people to leave their humanly concerns and consider the bird of the field and the lily of the field and the bird of the air. And Kierkegaard then goes into explaining how this teaching is actually a call for human beings to venture into creation, silence themselves, and humble themselves down to a level where they, instead of seeing themselves as the master of the world, take the bird and the lily as their absolute teachers, as their absolute masters in leading the direction towards God and towards gaining closeness to God. And I think, in a way, it's a quite, for me, basic teaching that Kierkegaard provides. As always with Kierkegaard, it's basic and complex at the same time. But I think what he's urging for is exactly, as in many of his works, sort of a rediscovery of faith through suspicion of religious institutions and through suspicion of sort of human beings claiming sort of some kind of spiritual authority over the world. And I think when I look at this in relation to myself, having grown up in a very secularized society, but still having some kind of spiritual tension, some kind of search characterizing my whole life throughout. These teachings of sort of finding spirituality and of finding some kind of divine connection, not through the institution, but actually by going inwards and humbling myself down towards the world. I think that has been quite influential for me. And if I look at sort of Namibian society today, I see actually with the young people that I work with in various spheres how there is sort of also a rejection of the religious institution. But rather than what I see in Denmark with this sort of atheist movement, this sort of rejection of the religious institution still points towards some kind of spiritual search. So it's not sort of the rejection of God, but more rejection of the institution as the medium to necessarily reach God. I don't know, I think I'm still working with these thoughts, fieldwork is still going on, but I think, yes, that is what I've sort of seen by working with this work that my father gave the book to me just before going on fieldwork here. So I think again, talking with these spiritual connections and sort of how the universe works sort of in also shaping our thoughts and what we do in this world. I think this is sort of, for me, a quite remarkable work that has also, as you can hear, I have a bit of existential tendencies and things can go very long and very circular, but I think that is what I have to say about that book.
Maybe if we just do a follow-up on that point of spiritual, to the world, to humanity, to society, do we pay attention to spiritual connection, nature, among ourselves? How is that, in your view, been kind of observed globally and maybe also with some specific?
But I think human beings throughout history, probably even from pre-industrial times, have started sort of alienating themselves towards nature by making some kind of dichotomy between nature and culture, nature and society in a way. And I think in these years, probably also because of the realization that we are very much part of nature and we rely on this resource that we have been screwing up throughout times, I think there is sort of a rediscovery of the necessity of considering our being a part of nature, a part of the world. But I think it's very confused because at the same time we live in a neoliberal reality where when you feel this urge, I must reconnect with nature, the very destructive force that is capitalism that created this alienation we're experiencing offers you, okay, but you can pay whatever amount of money and you can go to Namibia as a Danish tourist and you can go on a safari and you can be in nature and you can feel in touch. But again, you're not really dealing with your destructive engagement with nature. You're not really humbling yourself down to nature. So I think there is a rediscovery of, and also it manifests also in more positive ways of sort of consciousness towards the environment, people trying to live more organic. All those things, it's sort of bifurcated in the sense that you have a negative and a positive side to it. But I think the danger is that right now the destructive force that has alienated us towards our existence and creation in nature is now trying to offer us ways of dealing with it, but it's not really changing the destructive dynamics of that system, if it makes sense.
Maybe we can also just dwell on the two. You see, the developed world and the developing world and the form of spiritual connection, considering now that we are in this era of the fourth industrial revolution, how that, whether you think that journey or that trajectory is the path we should pursue as a world, or and how it's going to leave us with this connection, this spiritual connection to the very foundation of our beginning.
I think we must start reconfiguring how we consider what is technology. I don't think if we go with this technology of today, I don't think that will solve the major issues we are facing environmentally speaking and how it spills over to social issues and poverty and shit like that. I don't think that can be the way, because I think exactly that intensification of our means of production has proved incredibly destructive. And the problem is when we make these things, we don't consider the long-term effects. When we put a lid in petrol, when we did that once upon a time, it solved the issue. The engine didn't make any sound anymore. But we fucked up our ocean, we fucked up our atmosphere. And I think it's the same problem we're standing with now. We have some issues that technology claims to be able to solve. But at the same time, do we have the capacity to know how this influences the world in 200 years? I don't think so. I think if we are to find technology, we should maybe go to those people who are actually engaging in a at least less destructive way with the natural surroundings, and see how, with a bit of humbleness, we can actually learn how to survive with the technology that we have been given by our creation. I don't know. And our mind goes very far there. Sometimes we want to outsource our thinking by making computerized systems for everything. But I think in its core, we're also just making ourselves unable to rely on intuition, rely on those other faculties that is not necessarily only intellectual knowledge.
Maybe just in conclusion, I would want you to maybe comparison. How do you really explain or understand these two, culture, tradition, and nature, and modernity or lifestyle?
I think culture is constantly evolving. So I think maybe it's also like dichotomy between tradition and modernity is in itself problematic, right? Because what is considered traditional, let's say, Wambo culture in Namibia today, is very far from the way things were practiced 300 years ago in the north of Namibia. Like these things, they change, although we try to conserve in a way. But I think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't learn from the old ways. It doesn't mean that we should reject new ways of doing things. I think maybe by acknowledging that things are changing dynamically, we must constantly, in whatever we do in the world, assess how can I make these things work together, rather than saying either it's traditional or it's modern or it's. I think we must try not to work too much in these sort of strict dichotomies and strict contrasts, because I don't think that's how the world is. I think the world is a very messy place where things, they contradict each other constantly, because I think that is the first thing I learned doing ethnography, is that trying to contain these things, trying to make it sterile, trying to make it not seem messy, really doesn't do justice to what I'm experiencing, because what I'm experiencing is that it's all a big mess. And there is no tradition and there is no modernity, but when we start, there is only tradition and modernity when we start talking about things within those confines in a way, East and West.
That's cool.